Hello everybody, so this is going to be a guide to Damba. Why am I making a guide? Well, I wanted content because I am stupid and I'm running out of content. I also wanted the character to be approachable. There's this stigma around him that you need to attend an Ivy League school for 6 years to master the arcane arts of throwing snakes at bad guys. Like, this character is so much fun, right? Every support player loves him and I want more people to have fun with him. So who am I? I'm a support main, I'm a former pro player, I'm a grandmaster, and I have way too much time on this character. Now, I want this thing to be watchable, even if you're already a good Damba, right? I'm gonna try to make this not dry. So whether you want to watch the stream, man, say haha funny things about the snake guy, or you actually want to get good at this character, let's get into it. So there's going to be 10 parts to this video. There's going to be an intro, how to get good at support, why Damba and the build, how to use the weapon, how to use the abilities, how to use the ult, how to position, how to duel, some techs and tips, the most common mistake for every rank, and how to identify why you're losing. So I don't want to read this character's wiki, right? He has a little shoot, it has an arc, it's very cool. When you reload, you throw your snake, and if that hits someone, it stuns them for 1 second. He has a heal, it just heals, that's it. He has a gourd, it throws a projectile, it makes a little puddle, and that heals allies and damages enemies. Sliver is his mobility, you move from point A to point B, and you're immune to everything while you're moving. Your ult throws this ball that explodes into a bigger ball that fears enemies for 2 seconds. Basically, they just run away from the big ball, they can't do anything else, it's just a stun, but they're moving. It detonates either when the projectile hits a wall, or when you detonate it by hitting the ult button again. For his talents, this one makes your stun do more damage and fly farther. It's a DPS talent, it's fine, not going to worry about it in this guide. This one makes your gourd do twice as much healing, but do no damage. It's garbage, don't worry about it, this represents it really well. This one just makes you heal strong. It gives you the extra oomph to keep 4 whole ass idiots alive. This is the good one. So you've been watching some beautifully edited Damba gameplay. Hopefully you have a general idea of what this character does. If you don't, just go in shooting range, mess around for a bit. Keep in mind, Damba's ult has been bugged in the shooting range for 4 years and counting. This section is just supposed to let you know what the abilities do. So now, I'm going to seamlessly transition from ability descriptions to how this game works at a high macro level. There's a point to this, I promise. So, why do supports exist? What is their job? Why do we pick them? It's not healing. At least it's not just healing, otherwise we just pick 5 supports. They don't actually do more damage than DPS, they're not tankier than tanks, they don't really have good mobility, they don't actually have anything going for them other than sometimes they can make the enemy not move for a bit and this cool healing thing. So why do we pick them? Well, it's really obvious in hindsight, you fucking idiot, they're there to support people. Everything would fall apart without a support, right? The tanks can't do their job, the DPS can't do their job, everything just does not work. As a support, you are the backbone of your team, nothing happens without you. So you're there to make your team do their jobs, right? You're there to make their jobs as easy as possible. Let's say there's a 1v1 going on between an Andro and a Mave. It's a pretty even matchup, right? The better player should win. Now, what if the Mave has 4,000 health? Unless the Mave is absolute trash, she's gonna win that. Another scenario, let's say the Andro can't move or shoot or use any abilities. Again, I'm sure that there are some players that will find a way to lose that, but it should be pretty easy for the Mave. Another scenario, the Andro only has 1,000 health, once again, Maves win that. And that's your job as a support. It is a completely selfless role, the champions that you play are absolute garbage at doing pretty much everything, aside from this one game-defining thing called supporting. So now that we know that your job is to make your team's lives easier, and we know how we do that, with healing, CC, and damage, the question is where and when. These maps are big, there's a lot going on, there's 10 people in a lobby at a time, so let's break it down to something we can actually think about. If you want the better, less condensed version, because I will be glossing over things, and it's only from the support point of view, like this is the shitty Spark Notes version for Ranked, these 3 videos are fantastic, I'm pretty much copy-pasting from them, and I really recommend them, they're really good. There's only 3 episodes because Hyros decided to pull the plug on anything competitive in this game with a tweet a few months ago. It's almost like the comp scene affected more than just esports. And if you do want the comp scene back, then let your AOC reps know. So the videos are on space, resources, and the flow of the fight. I'm going to be saying map control, resources, and recognizing the important part of a fight, again, shitty Spark Notes. So to condense this hour-long video into one sentence, map control is important. It gives your DPS more space to do stuff. Like, you've played games before, you know how it feels to be stuffed into a corner with 5 people, you know, you're just all slowly dying, you can't do anything, you're all just in this corner, it feels awful. Now if you compare that to when you have the entire map open, your team's steamrolling, you can go wherever you want, you can do anything, you're not under any pressure. Your team wants to have control of the important bits of the map, mostly high grounds, so a lot of your heals and damage and CC should go into the people who are contesting the important bits of the map. Just like how you want to use your heals, damage, and CC, I'm just going to call them your resources, at the right time of the fight. I don't want to spend too much time on this because I'm going to go over this later with the abilities, but just know that this is a massive ult, probably a 1 fight, and this is you're dead, your team's dead, and you lose. A team fight in general has 3 phases. There's the poke phase, the engage phase, and the cleanup phase. You're going to start off by poking, right? And you're just going to be playing pretty slowly. The tanks are going to go to their lanes, your DPS are going to shoot each other a little bit. And your job as a support during this part of the fight is to enable that, right? You enable your tanks standing around you. You heal up poke. You heal up your DPS who are shooting and taking damage. You maybe do a little bit of poke yourself. Nothing too much is going on here, right? This is mostly what Frog Isle is like, just 2 teams kind of poking at each other. Sometimes people get picked during this part. Then, someone will try to make a play, also known as an engage, right? Maybe an Ashe will dash in or someone pops an ult and then the real fight starts. As soon as that happens, as soon as someone from either team commits to a play, you want to put 95 of your efforts into that area. Again, you're not really starting anything yourself. Supports are really bad at starting anything, but you're supporting, right? Whether that's supporting your team being aggressive or supporting your team trying to survive the other team's aggression. You can't just sit back and heal as the fight happens in front of you. After this, usually one team has a big advantage, and the fight's pretty much over. It's just cleanup. Sometimes fights get really messy, and those are called devolved fights, and when that happens, it's kind of just instinct. Good luck. So now let's wrap this all up. What's the point of all this, right? Why should you care about this? I thought this video was supposed to be me reading the wiki article and telling you to heal things gooder. All this is basically the why of supporting. These are the reasons why you do the things that you do. I can put all the text and all the tips and all the how-tos in this guide, but if you don't know what to do and why to do it, it doesn't matter. I'm not going to tell you how to play Damba, I'm going to tell you how to support as Damba. So just to recap this section, you are here to enable your team. You enable your team with damage, healing, and CC. Map control is important. Cooldown management is important. Fights have 3 phases, the poke phase, the engage phase, and the cleanup phase. You heal and poke during the poke phase, participate in the engage, and heal and poke during the cleanup phase. So now that we know why we're here and what we're looking to do, why do we pick Damba? What does this character have that makes him a good support? 3 main things. He has throughput heals, he has CC, and he's tanky. This all makes him pretty versatile. There's not really ever a bad Damba game. There's better options sometimes, but Damba will almost never be bad, right? In slow comps, he has enough healing to keep everyone alive. His CC is good for countering aggression. His tankiness lets him survive. In faster comps, his CC is like really good setup, and his tankiness also lets him participate in fights. In patch 4.4, which is when I am making this, he also happens to have one of the highest healing outputs in the game. He also has one of the highest skill caps in the game. Like if you're hitting shots, you're using your abilities well, you're hitting stuns, you're hitting good ults, you're going to be doing a lot. You can't just unbind every button except heal and mobility and expect to perform well. So let's talk about loadout. We already know that we're running Spirit's Chosen. Let's talk about the 2 core cards in his build. The first is Eerie Presence. Everybody runs this. At a 3 or a 4, preferably a 4. It just takes him more consistent. No reason to not run this. Possession, main reason for his tankiness. 4 or 5, it's a free blast shields and Haven free rate from round 1. It is insane. These are going to be in every single build. Now, for the cards that define the build. So Spirits is the more traditional style. It just adds a bit of utility to your heal, right? Everything likes having speed, but some things in particular, like Term, Lex, Talus, Koa, get a lot of value out of it. Snake Pit is newer, but it's a lot of fun. If you stack this with Nimble, you can run away from pretty much anything. Mini Gourds is somewhere in between. It's more healing, but it's mostly good because it gives you more ult charge, right? You can pretty much always have a Gourd on the other team, and aggro Gourds can give you as much as 20% ult charge in 5 seconds. It's actually crazy. If you get Morale Boost with this, you can be ulting as much as 3 times per mid-fight. Finally, 1-pointers. I think Ritual Magic is necessary. It lets you stay in the fight, and you don't have to use out-of-combat healing or gourd yourself to heal up. It's great. Fleeting is just nice cooldown reduction on an ability that you're going to be using a lot. If you're using Swift Spirits or Snake Pit as your main card, Many Gourds is a good one pointer. Some people really like Lighter Gourd. You don't need it. It does what it says, but that's not super necessary. Some people swear by it though. Feed the Spirits isn't really worth it on Damba. His cooldowns are already pretty low, and there are better options to run at a higher level. These are the builds that I personally use. If there's a card that's not mentioned, it isn't really worth it in my opinion, but feel free to experiment and be wrong. Some of them are okay, but they're kind of outclassed, or there's not room for them, or something. For items, Chronos and Morale Boost are usually the way to go. Which one you get depends on how much ult charge you have relative to the next mid-fight and how many times you want to be ulting in that mid-fight. Deft Hands makes your stun come out quicker. I personally think it's matchup dependent if you buy this item or not. It does really well when you're getting ran at by squishies, like a Eevee. Eevee can get 2 shots off before you hit over for stun, but with Deft Hands 1, she can only get 1 shot off. It also gives Talus Depression. Nimble is a cool item. It works really well with the Snake Pit build, but it's also just good by itself in situations where you need to be moving around a lot, like on maps where there's a lot of rotations, like Warders and Jag. Blue items, always nice, depending on the other team's comp. Damba already has like a lot of survivability though, so it's usually better to go into yellow items. Illuminate is really nice, since Damba can pretty much dumpster on most stealth characters. Wrecker is fine if you're like really late game against 2 shields. I would not buy it early though. Caught, not good. You should be playing with your team, and your team should be applying Caught for you. You can maybe buy it if you're being forced to 1v1 DPS by yourself. That should never happen. You can usually just play with your own DPS better. Bulldozer and ingredient items are never worth buying on Damba. They don't do anything, they don't help you support your team. A common mistake that people make is just like not shooting. Like there's no reason not to shoot. Hit the button, please. You can farm tanks, you can spam angles, there's literally no downside. So, the next question is, how do you manage stuns versus damage? Basically, you want to look for stuns when the stun will set up more damage than just doing damage. So you want to use stuns to like cancel movement. You want to catch DPS when they peak, especially when your own DPS can follow up on that, right? You can also stun to save your team from dives. And if you can't be shooting, if you don't see anything, and you don't need to spam an angle, you should be starting to stun. You do this so that you have a stun ready quicker if something does pop out. You can also cancel your reload by using any ability. Alright, so heal and gourd are pretty much used for the same thing, just keeping people alive. Your heal priority, to simplify, usually goes fighting, then alive, then healthy. So if a flank's in the enemy backline and he's made a decision that either the enemy team's dying or he is, then you need to enable that if you can. If he's off in Brazil and you just die trying to help, then don't help. Don't make 1 dead idiot 2 dead idiots. But you can usually help. Keeping people alive and healthy is pretty straightforward. With Gourd, you want to max out the value you get out of it, right? So you want your team to be in it for as long as possible, and you want to be doing damage with it if you can. So most of the time, that's going to be on point where you're both healing your main tank and damaging their main tank. Putting Gourd on corners where your DPS are fighting from is also good. It's like you wouldn't want to use Gourd on an Eevee most of the time. Gourding yourself for sustain is fine, you just don't want to, right? Ideally you don't take too much damage, you rely on ritual magic, but gourding yourself is fine. An underrated tip for Damba is to use Gourd for ult charge. Just like chuck it at the other team, this thing does 225 damage per second. If you get that on multiple people, that's a lot of damage, a lot of ult charge. It works really well with higher levels of many Gourds. Sliver is going to be used for 2 things, mobility and cleanses and dodges. If you're going to get hit by big spooky thing, don't. You can also use Sliver for mobility, which is riskier, but it's worth it sometimes. It's a pretty short cooldown, so assuming you're not under too much pressure, you can kind of spam it. Damba's abilities and weapon are very spammy, they have very low cooldowns. You don't really have to worry about saving them. I know I talked about cooldown management earlier in the how to support good part, but that doesn't really apply to Damba too much. As long as you get value out of your cooldowns, you're good. There's 2 reasons to use Damba ult. You either kill something with it, or you peel. That's it. You always want to have a specific reason to use this thing. You gotta make sure you get more value than I hit a 5-man ult, what the heck guys. Get a kill or save someone, that's it. Late game, that's a bit harder to do because Rezel exists, so you can sort of change what you want to do with it. If you can still get a kill or peel for someone, then do it. Like punishing specific people for not buying Rezel is great, but it's more okay to just look for some value somewhere else. Like if you ult a Khan and he has Rezel so he lives, but your team's Cassie does 2k damage to him, and now he has to start backing up. That's value, that's a fine ult. I made a whole ass YouTube series on the specifics of positioning for every map. It's the most important and most difficult part of positioning, but here's the quick version. Again, let's throw it back to what supports do. The whole enable your team so they can take map control, and then how a fight breaks down with the 3 phases and all that. Now let's think about all that, but in terms of positioning. To get like the really obvious out of the way, you don't want to die. That's bad. Don't die. So staying safe usually involves one of two things. Playing with your DPS so that if you do get ran at, you can fight them off together with the power of friendship, or rotating away so you don't get ran at. Also worth mentioning that most of the time your tanks will be making space for you. If your tanks are stacking, you're either forced to play like super close, hope you have good matchups, you don't get unlucky and you just outplay the other team, or you have to play really far back so there's a lower chance that you do get ran at. But if your tanks are making space for you, then use it. Take safe open space. Another thing worth mentioning, your DPS should not have to break their backs to peel for you. You're not some vulnerable damsel in distress. Calm down, princess. I know Reddit posts about bad player spam need healing will inflate your ego, but again, what is your job? To enable your team. If your team has to cross the fucking Alps like Hannibal to peel for you, then you're not doing your job. It should be easy for your DPS to peel for you. So at the start of a fight, during the poke phase, your team is going to take some space, you're going to start in your backline with your DPS and rotating with your team if it's needed. If where you are isn't safe, then move. Heal priority matters a lot during this bit. Then something's going to happen. Someone's going to make a play that's going to move the fight along to the engage phase. Maybe a DPS is going to commit to a duel. Maybe someone is going to make a play with an ult. Whatever this play is depends on context. It's kind of up to you to decide where that is. It's not always super black and white. Again, worth mentioning that supports are very bad at starting fights. Damba can sort of start a fight with an ult if you think you have follow-up though. But you're not going to like lead the charge into battle or opt into a duel with the other team's DPS. I mean, you can, but that's a very good way to die. But this engage, right? This is where you can make the difference as a support. The whole team fight is going to be decided off who wins this little fight. So you want to get involved. And again, staying safe, but bringing back to how you support, what do? You enable people with damage, healing, and CC. So you get right up in there. Shooting things, healing people, stunning people, hitting big ults. You enable your DPS, you make the fight easy for them. But never go in front of people. Again, you're there to enable. Going in front of your tanks is the quickest and easy way to eat 2200 damage in half a second. So you're going to follow them, stay a little bit behind, but still close enough to contribute. When the fight reaches the cleanup phase, the same fundamentals apply, right? Play with your DPS, stay safe, all that fun stuff. As long as you don't split up or do something really dumb, you should be okay. In devolved fights, when shit's hit the fan, everything's messy and chaotic. Your best bet is to just stick with your DPS, heal things, the same fundamentals still apply, it's just harder to keep track of things. One last thing. You never, ever heal bot. Heal botting is for bitches. You're not a bitch. So now that we've established where you should be standing, and you know that you shouldn't be a heal bot, your natural reaction is going to be, well, I'm just going to dive the other team's backline. You shouldn't do that, but dueling DPS and just how to fight DPS in general is still important. You should never really put yourself in a situation where you have to 1v1 someone. It's going to happen though. You can sort of opt into these fights either by intentionally putting yourself in a position where you'll get dove by a flank or by running at the other team's DPS, but like, don't. Like, you can make some big dick plays doing this. It looks really flashy, and everybody loves a gigantic ego, but it's not really your job. So the first thing to know that is if you just stand there and shoot the other team's DPS, you will lose that every time. Unless it's Skye, you kind of shit on Skye, Skye sucks. So everything you're going to do is going to be to make this fight unfair. Easiest way to do this? Put your ego to the side and solo ult. It's just a free kill most of the time, it keeps you alive, it's great. If you don't have your ult, then things get hard. So let's assume you can't get to your team, you're by yourself, the fight's devolved, everything's messy, and now you need to 1v1 a DPS. The first thing you want to do is take cover. Use Sliver if you need to. Again, you lose a straight up fight, so don't take one. If you're already behind cover, then great. Then you want to gourd yourself. Chances are you've taken some damage, so healing up is good, but the placement of the gourd is really, really important. You want to gourd the corner that you're playing around so that it both heals you and damages the enemy if they chase you. There's two reasons for this more aggressive gourd placement. One, it just does damage. That's nice. Gourd really helps turn these sorts of fights in your favor. 2, it sets up the next part of your plan, which is to hit a stun. If you hit a stun, you do enough damage to where you win a straight up fight, especially with no rezo. So you look for the damage numbers. If you see damage numbers, you essentially have wall hacks. You can line up the stun with that. If you don't see damage numbers, well, at the very least you know where they're not. Either way helps you line up the stun. All of this is just trying to get you to the point where if you both hit all your shots, you win. If that happens, just take the fight, hit your shots, get the kill. If they force a fight and you get caught in the open, just try and hit shots. Reloading in front of DPS is just asking to take free damage, especially with no deft hands. Just go for the shots. Best you can do is hope that they beef and you hit more shots than them. Something else, if you can, you want to use Sliver to dodge the main source of their damage. So like Zin's Yomi shot, boosted Maeve daggers, Cassie's blast combo, stuff like that. If you can, try and sneak a heal in there somewhere just to refresh your possession DR. If you get dove by a tank, you're never really going to win that. Except for Nando and Wekono, you can ego them a little bit. But normally, the best you can do is just run away and try to get healed for. Something really underrated in this game is strafe patterns. Ideally, you want the person that you're fighting to miss as much as possible. You want them to look like they're awful at the game. There's 2 types of strafing you want to use, but first, let's talk about hitboxes. In other games, they use more accurate hitboxes, so you can just spam buttons and flip a DPI switch and you'll enter the 4th dimension. In Paladins, we have capsule hitboxes. Basically, this means that your hitbox is a box. Well, it's a capsule, but it looks like this. This is what your hitbox is. So what this means is that strafes have to be bigger, because if you just spam A and D, your hitbox won't actually move around that much. So versus tracking characters, your goal here is to get them to overshoot and overcorrect as much as possible. You want to change direction as much as you can while still moving your hitbox around enough. Again, you can't just spam A and D. These movements need to be quick enough so that you force the other person to overshoot and overcorrect, but not too quick so your hitbox doesn't move. Against characters who have distinct shots, you want to move when they shoot. It's still the same principle of making them overshoot and overcorrect, but instead of your hitbox being the main factor when you move, it's going to be when they shoot. There's not much tech for Damba. You know how Fernando can moonwalk, and it's useful because you can keep your shield towards the other team? You can do it on Damba too. It doesn't have a purpose, but you can do it. When you're hitting stuns, you can wall jump. When you stun, your reload projectile has no midair inaccuracy. So if someone is chasing you around a corner, you can wall jump to come at them from an unexpected angle. Your weapon does have midair inaccuracy, but your reload projectile does not. For tips on how to actually hit the stun, it's slightly slower than your weapon attack and again has no midair inaccuracy. Spamming chokes and corners is your best bet. When you're looking to hit a specific target and there's any significant amount of distance between the two of you, just remember that no one ever walks in a straight line. Like some people do, but they're dumb. People will try to dodge your stun at the last second, so you want to predict their little sidestep. It's easier to show than tell. As a side note, the best way to dodge a Damba stun is to stand still. Nobody ever seems to predict it. Just like this game's code, it's incredibly stupid, but somehow works. Your stun takes 2 seconds to wind up. It's worth knowing for certain matchups, like Moji's shield is 2 seconds, Eevee's ice block is 3 seconds, Andrew's reversal is 1.4 seconds, so knowing this, you can time your stuns to hit right as their immunities end. For Khan, if you wall jump, you can actually clip the top of his hitbox, because remember, capsule hitboxes are stupid and big, so you can clip the top of his hitbox with a stun if you jump over his shield, even if it looks like you can. If you're under a lot of pressure, let's say you're in a comp that's very, very aggressive, but you still need to heal a main tank, save your gourd for the main tank, and only use your gourd for the main tank. That lets you play with your offlane, played closer to your DPS, but still heal point really effectively. A tip for strafing, don't just dance around at the same place. Eventually people will catch on to that and just shoot in the middle of where you're strafing. You don't want to AD, you want to AD, stand still for a second, D, AAA, D, AD, just like make it unpredictable, right? Your Mending Spirit heal stacks, so if you heal someone twice, it'll do more healing. Some people are really passive on mid-fights, and they lose a lot of mid-fights, but they also win a lot of defenses. But they win those defenses because they're being forced to take part in the fight, they're being pushed into. So if that sounds familiar, then you can look to take what you're doing on the defenses and try to apply it in the mid-fights, and just try to be a bit more aggressive. With your ult, you generally want to fear people toward you. You want to detonate the ult behind them so it pushes them into your team so they're easier to kill. Your ult fear lasts 2 seconds, and your stun takes 2 seconds to wind up. So if you fear someone and then immediately start your reload, you can chain CC them for 3 seconds. Your gourd likes to bounce. It commonly does this on stairs, so if at all possible, try to either avoid throwing your gourd on stairs or throw it a bit higher so that when it does bounce, it bounces down instead of bouncing off to Narnia. If you're ever in trouble, don't gourd and then sliver out of your gourd. If you're going to sliver, throw a gourd where you're going to sliver to first. Your stun has a 4-second timeout. If you stun someone, you cannot stun them for another 4 seconds. You, as a support, are the most important person on your team. If you die, the team fight's probably lost. Since your support is gone, the other team still has their support, but if you lose a tank or DPS, it just gets a little bit harder, so prioritize keeping yourself alive. A really common mistake that people make is dismounting early. Don't dismount until you need to do something. Staying on mount and rotating around is really cool, and you can get a lot of cool stuff done like that. You can shoot, heal, then shoot in the same amount of time that it takes you to shoot, then shoot. So I've done VODs on stream at twitch.tv/thefishnit for almost every rank from gold to grandmasters. So I'm going to go over common mistakes and how to fix them, and how to identify the mistakes that you're making, because the point of this whole guide is for you to take this, then go and grind and get good at Damba. If you want your own VOD done on stream, then I've got a channel point redeem for it, or you could just ask nicely, the channel point redeem is just there so it doesn't get spammed. I'm going to lump bronze to gold in the same elo because you can only replay games that have a diamond player in them, and the matchmaker usually isn't bad enough to put bronzes and diamonds in the same lobby, but it will put golds and diamonds in the same lobby, so I'm just going to clump them together because I actually have not seen bronze or silver Damba gameplay. So in these elos, there's a lot of people just randomly dying, and the biggest mistake is usually not playing with DPS. Most Dambas will usually just not really be looking for anything, just kind of doing what's in front of them. So the biggest tip for this elo is going to be to play with DPS. Follow your DPS, enable them, hold hands, pocket them in their fights, and this is good to prevent, people just randomly dying. Another tip, tunnel vision is commonly an issue here. You can try cranking your FOV to 120. It's what I use. I think it's really, really nice for improving just game sense. You can see more of the map. It messes with your sensitivity though. Try it out and see if you like it. I personally couldn't go without it. In Plat, your positioning will usually be a bit better, but it'll still be bad just for different reasons. People in Plat usually play really hard in mid, and they usually play very, very close. So if you're in Plat, you can try to stay farther back from the team so you don't take as much poke. Like I see a lot of people in Plat just staying in mid, taking a lot of spam damage, slithering to a corner, having to gore themselves and being out of the fight, when they could have just been playing near the corner the entire time. Another mistake is that ults in Plat usually don't get too much value, so looking for specific targets with ult and remembering you're either looking for a kill or looking to peel is a really good idea. The most common mistake that I see in Diamond is that there are very good healers, but that's all they do. They just heal. They stay in the backline, they stay in good positions in the backline, they heal well, their cooldown usage is good, but they don't ever change that. So not being aggressive with your team is the biggest mistake in Diamond. If your offlane is making some sort of play, you can't just sit back in main and heal and watch them play. You need to be in there contributing again, damage and CC. A lot of support players in Diamond are just healing, so contributing damage and CC to fights, especially fights that your offlane takes, is a really good idea. For Masters, most players in Masters will have figured most things out, right? They'll know the rules of how to play Damba, they'll know positioning, they'll know rotations. But now that they know the rules, now you get to the fun part. Now you get to break them. So normally, I'd say slivering into the backline, not really a good play. But if you manage to do it at the same time as your team, or you off angle, you play split from your team, that's generally not good, but maybe it sets up an alt angle. You can start thinking about matchups and specific game situations and game states, and you can sort of mess with the rules a little bit. You can start looking for more spicy aggressive plays. For Grandmaster and the comp scene, you have the fundamentals down at this point. It's just going to be matchups and win conditions and team play, which is like more macro game-wide stuff, so it's not really stuff that would fit into a Damba guide. Most of the Grandmaster VODs that I get are DPS and tank players, and they're really good at those roles, and they're filling on support, and there's a bit of a mentality difference there. They'll look to do things by themselves, and they're generally really good at it, but they don't look to enable their team, so it's just a mentality thing. But that's just a general rule. There's a lot of ways to be good or bad in this game, so if you want to identify what you actually need to improve on, you need to figure out why your team is losing fights. If your team is losing because they're just getting picked a lot, people are just randomly dying, then it's probably your microplay, your healing priority, your positioning. Maybe your healing priority is off, maybe you're tunnel visioning, maybe you're positioning away from your DPS, or maybe you're focusing too hard on point. If your team is losing fights because you're dying, then you need to figure out why you're dying. Positioning and positioning away from your team, in particular, is going to be the most common answer here. If your team just isn't winning their fights, if your team's aggressive plays just aren't working out, then you're probably not being aggressive enough. You're not having enough of an impact on fights. It'll vary from player to player, and there's other reasons than the ones that I listed here. Identifying this stuff is hard, which is why VODs are nice. Again, I do VODs on my Twitch if you're interested on that. I stream every day starting at 8 PM EST. Then, once you have the things that you want to improve on, you need to actually improve on them. You want to do this one thing at a time. More than that, and it's just way too many things to keep track of. So if you just want to focus on positioning with your DPS, then do that. Okay, play a whole bunch of Damba, or even just a whole bunch of support really, and just work on that one thing. Then, once you're okay with that one thing, then you can move on to the next thing. When you've run out of things, then VOD again, get more things, and repeat. You can't just play the game to improve, you need to practice. And that's going to be it for the Damba guide. I hope everybody enjoyed, I hope it helps people, and I'll see everybody next time. Bye bye.